Presiding Officer, in 2020, this Parliament voted for a deposit return scheme for single-use drinks containers, where the onus for dealing with the disposal and reuse of these containers is placed on the companies which produce them. The polluter pays principle. Parliament did so because it looked around the world and saw that deposit return schemes worked, with more than 50 schemes worldwide. It did so because it recognised the benefits of dramatically reduced litter, a step change in recycling rates, and having yet another tool in the fight against climate change. And that those benefits increase the larger the scope of the scheme. It did so because the case is strongest, both economically and environmentally, where schemes are all-inclusive. And it did so because it took in good faith a UK-wide agreement on the introduction of a deposit return schemes which include glass. After all, only a few months before, the UK government had been elected on just such a promise. Rishi Sunak, Alistair Jack and Douglas Ross, all elected on the promise of a full deposit return scheme. The Scottish Parliament voted for this all-inclusive deposit return scheme because it was the latest in a long list of ways in which our Parliament has used its powers to deliver distinctive and progressive policies for Scotland. The Scottish Child Payment, free bus travel for under-22s, better rights for tenants, free tuition for students, the indoor smoking ban. That is the context in which I am updating Parliament today. Last week, I told Parliament of the communication from the UK government which, at the 11th hour, imposed a number of highly significant conditions on our scheme, including the removal of glass. It did so by refusing to agree a full exclusion from the Internal Market Act after almost 2 years of discussion. The UK government has offered no justification for removing one of the most significant aspects of the scheme which this Parliament voted for, the inclusion of glass. The decision letter says the UK government notes the strong representations made by relevant businesses. The environmental and economic case for including glass in our DRS is clear and follows the majority of schemes operating successfully around the world. Glass is one of the 3 main materials used to make single-use drinks containers and accounts for more than a quarter of all the containers to be included in our deposit return scheme as planned. It is one of the most common items to pollute our beaches, and broken glass poses a hazard to children, pets and wildlife. Local authority, private sector and voluntary clean-up crews are left to deal with littered glass. Indeed, the UK government's own analysis quantified these benefits, acknowledging that the social and economic benefits of DRS are increased by 64% when glass is included. That is why, Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government proceeded in good faith to include glass in our DRS, backed by this Parliament. And it is why businesses have invested millions of pounds in the infrastructure to handle glass. Up until March 2022, the UK Government itself had planned to include glass in the English scheme. As recently as January this year, it also confirmed Wales would have glass included in its DRS, and that it was for each of the devolved nations to decide on the scope of their DRS. But this isn't just about glass, Presiding Officer. An even bigger act of sabotage comes from the UK government imposing a number of other conditions, including a maximum cap on deposit levels agreed across all nations, 1 administration fee to cover all schemes across the UK, 1 barcode for use across all parts of the UK, and 1 logo for all schemes. These are all aspects of schemes that are absolutely legitimate areas of discussion in relation to alignment and interoperability. But the critical point, right now, is that the UK government can't tell us what they are, when they will be finalised, or if, indeed, they will even appear in regulations, or if, as appears likely, they will be delegated to a scheme delivery body, which is at least 2.5 years away. A body which is not empowered to deliver DRS in Scotland. The Scottish Government has said from day one that we recognise the need for alignment, for schemes across the UK to work in tandem. But let's be clear, Scotland has proceeded as planned. Wales, too, has worked on the basis of the common UK position.
Yep.
It is England
Yep.
who has chosen to step out of line. In matters of alignment...
Minister, if you will just allow me a moment. It is really important that the statement is heard without intervention or interruption. I'd be grateful if we could proceed on that basis. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In matters of alignment, whose line is it? Just the biggest player in the field? So, Presiding Officer, we are being invited to go ahead with a scheme here in Scotland where rules that we set now can be changed unilaterally by the UK Government at any time. I sought a further meeting with my ministerial counterpart in DEFRA again to seek assurances that we could have a stable basis on which to go forward, but it is clear that the UK Government has simply not yet done the work and is not in a position to give those assurances that Scottish businesses need. Earlier today, the First Minister and I also met with a wide range of businesses on where the UK Government's 11th hour intervention leaves us. I am grateful for the constructive and focused feedback we received today. The single biggest message from business is the need for certainty, for planning and investment.
Absolutely.
The UK Government's conditions blow a massive hole in any certainty.
Absolutely.
Since receiving the UK's decision 12 days ago, we have been engaging intensively with delivery partners, including Circularity Scotland and industry, to understand how this decision affects their preparations for the launch of Scotland's DRS. The removal of glass and the imposition of as yet unspecified conditions have both been pored over extensively. While Circularity Scotland has been optimistic that the scheme could go ahead without glass, overwhelmingly the feedback from producers, retailers and hospitality is that they cannot prepare for a March launch based on the changes being required by the UK Government without any certainty even about what those changes might be.
Exactly.
And since the delivery of DRS is an industry-led project, these views are critical. Today, the First Minister and I heard that industry in turn recognises the enormous amount of work carried out by their body, Circularity Scotland, on their behalf, and it acknowledges the case for sustaining a delivery vehicle for the DRS to come. So, in summary, Presiding Officer, the UK Government decision excludes glass from Scotland's DRS at the 11th hour, contrary to the will of the Scottish Parliament and the all-UK basis upon which we planned. It changes the playing field for non-glass drinks producers. It creates massive new uncertainty for businesses with conditions for interoperability with schemes in the rest of the UK which have not even been legislated for, and even then may not be clear. I told Parliament yesterday that our scheme cannot proceed as planned. The refusal of the UK Government alone to budge on glass makes that obvious. As of today, it is now clear that we have been left with no other option than to delay the launch of Scotland's DRS until October 2025 at the earliest, based on the UK Government's current stated aspirations. I remain committed to interoperable DRS schemes across the UK, provided that we can work in the spirit of collaboration, not imposition. I wrote again last night to the UK Government to urge ministers to reset a climate of trust and good faith, to galvanise and retain the knowledge that has been built in Circularity Scotland and DRS partners in Scotland. I have also today written to the NZ Committee in Parliament to say that we will be seeking to revisit the regulations that we laid in Parliament in mid-May, which set our launch date of the 1st of March and made other changes to the scheme. The immediate priority is to bring forward regulations to amend the go-live date, and subsequently I will also be considering how to bring forward revised provisions to deal with the UK Government's exclusion of glass and how best to reflect the decisions made so far by this Parliament. Let me be clear, Presiding Officer. This Parliament voted for a deposit return scheme. I am committed to a deposit return scheme. Scotland will have a deposit return scheme. It will come later than it need be. It will be more limited than it should be. More limited than Parliament voted for. More limited than I want. Than other devolved nations wanted. And even that the Tories at the time of the last election wanted. And these delays and dilutions lie squarely in the hands of a UK Government that has sadly seemed so far more intent on sabotaging this Parliament than protecting our environment.